What's going on, everyone? So today we've got a very different video from normal, mainly because honestly, I have had some of these experiences in person, this type of experience when going to not just like competitive events, but even casual events, to where the response on this, alongside the massive amount of community input, kind of drove me to go ahead and insert this into a video. What are we talking about today? Well, for those of you that might be on Reddit or just maybe had attended to a planetary qualifier, or maybe just paying attention to some of the community, not like outbursts or anything like that, but more just the community sentiment, I suppose. Well, you might know what we're talking about. And that is the Las Vegas planetary qualifier. Now, I'm not going to walk through this whole thing because there are not just one, not just two, not just three posts, but 4 total posts on the Reddit about this one person from the Las Vegas planetary qualifier. And we have multiple massively upvoted comments on multiple of my videos. Initially, when I had read the first comment, I hadn't seen any posts. I hadn't known where this was coming from, and I hadn't seen anyone also kind of corroborate these stories. But after a couple of days, there's just been more and more about this. So essentially, we had just a massively disruptive person at one of the recent planetary qualifiers, continuously calling for judges, getting more disruptive and more, well, kind of annoying questions. And of course, as many other people mentioned, that's not necessarily cause for a lot of disgruntled people. Having someone just constantly call a judge over and ask about every single little thing is something that you are technically completely allowed to do. Now, granted, in some cases it can stall out the matches and can run the clock, which can be a little bit, well, unsportsmanlike, but that's not necessarily enough. But then we start seeing, well, this one person yelling at the judge, saying that the judge was biased. And eventually we start seeing him, well, at this point, extremely frustrated and even throwing things at his opponent. And I don't know the whole story. I don't know exactly what went down, and I don't know what the actual response from the judges were. This is just kind of my thoughts on how this type of thing should be handled. And based on what I've seen from every single person that talks about this, it had not been handled nearly to the point where I would have handled it if I was a judge, or how I think the judge program should be handling it. And it's also important to note that these are the very first season 0 competitive events. So if we do not set this precedent now for future events, I really don't like or hope to not see any future events like this be handled, at least in the way that it was handled. And that is, they did nothing as far as every single post mentioned. In fact, as you can see here, the person who actually ended up winning the whole tournament was the same person who had these outbursts. And at the end of the day, that is a very, very poor showing in terms of Star Wars Unlimited community. Period. Doesn't matter if you're a good player. It doesn't matter if you're the worst player. It doesn't matter about anything. If you are unsportsmanlike, you take away so much, not just from the actual kind of reputation of the competitive environment or anything like that, or even the community of Star Wars Unlimited, but more so you take more away from the actual players who are trying to play the game. And you could see this perfectly represented in this comment here, as I will read through, because I think it's really important, because this is the key point that I feel about when these things happen. And that is, this young player I know from my LGS made the top cut. Mind you, the other person who had this whole rage where they're throwing things, getting mad at judges and things like that, also was in the top cut. And apparently this OP, the poster, said that he asked him about how he felt about the field. And he responded, he just hopes to not play against the guy who had this outburst. And the question was, why? I think he was going to talk about the cards, because that's what I was asking. Instead, he mentions the guy's outburst in the day. And that right there is exactly the problem. And he goes on to say this was so disheartening because the kid was a whiz and so great at the game. It's one of the many young, talented people that will not that would take not just Star Wars Limited, but any TCG he chooses to play and into the future where the community is thriving, competitive, and healthy. And for it not to be about the game, the escape and fun it offers, and instead about the anxiety and fear in that moment, that made me really upset. And that is exactly where I would be. And again, I was viewing this, I was looking at the planetary qualifiers, and everything about the game looks to be in an amazing, amazing state. And I was going to do a video talking a little bit more about the planetary qualifier meta, and I'm sure we'll be doing that more and more as we get more of them. But these types of things, especially when I had multiple people commenting who went to this Las Vegas planetary qualifier, as well as multiple posts in the community talking about this, as well as not seeing any sort of response as a resolution. At first, I had read the comment. I'm like, oh, well, someone had an outburst at Las Vegas planetary qualifier. Sure, that happens all the time. But again, the fact that nothing was done, there was no disqualification, there was no, game loss, there was no actual repercussions in the competitive sense, and instead he just goes on to win the whole tournament, is extremely disheartening. And again, it all boils down to this. The game should not be you worrying about what your opponent's going to do to you physically or verbally, but rather what their tech and DJ is going to do to your resources and make you sad. That's what you should be thinking about, not the things outside of the game. And of course, basically everyone is on the same page. Yeah, apparently Greg is the name. I don't know the full name. I don't think it's really relevant. I just want to see it change for future references. And I do think the player who did win this should be disqualified from the Galactic Championships, period. But, we'll talk about that another day, assuming we have the actual evidence for this. And if these are just the whole community at the same time as lying about this, which I don't think is the case, then I will eat my words. But if this did happen, and again, every single thing is pointing to the same thing, which is that it did happen, he should be suspended from competitive play. And that is basically the consensus. And you can even see more and more comments like disgusting, vile behavior. I was there and witnessed this. I have individually had extremely terrible interactions with him. And again, as I mentioned, there's multiple posts about this. Here's the second post, which I'll talk about. I won't go into the other post because this is just another kind of diving into the whole person and their interactions with them in that field. And apparently we have 3 different incidents of this person being this disruptive force amongst the community. And I get it. Well, apparently fourth incident was the Vegas planetary qualifier. 3 previous incidents in Odyssey Games planetary qualifier, Set 1 store showdown, and even prior to that. But the big thing for this is, unfortunately, the judges in the area or whoever's running these events did not actually disqualify these players, right? And I get it. In some situations like this first one, they were talking about how they got into a verbal argument. The disrespect was another level. Sure. Like, maybe that's not enough to ban people. But then we have another incident where there's banter and roll for the win, which is also against the rules. So now we're asking for rules violation, which usually gives you a game loss. In other trading card games, we have people getting completely shunned. Like, I remember in Magic the Gathering, a recent tournament where some people agreed behind the scenes that if a game had went to time, then they would immediately concede, because or rather, if the game was going to go to time and there was one clear winner, one of them would concede in order for the other person to actually go forward instead of them tying, and that person decided not to. And you wouldn't believe the community outrage and the actual response afterwards from people. And that's not even necessarily a rule violation or being like incredibly disrespectful. That was like a secondhand deal. And so to see these types of things talked about, and in this case, an extremely egregious example that was directly impacting the judges and the other people there, not to be dealt with. Again, multiple various interaction with this person, not at the same location, but even just one of these, like the Vegas Planetary Qualifier, should be enough to disqualify you. If you are ever threatening someone, period, you should be thrown out of an establishment, much less when we're playing literally just a trading card game. And I know that's a kind of a derivative, very not necessarily the best way to put it for most people, because I also have a lot of feelings when it comes to competing in some of these games and trying to win. So it's not just a card game for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, even if it was the most important event of your life, doesn't give you some sort of right to start throwing things, period. So this should have been dealt with immediately with an immediate disqualification. And going forward, we should see this player, again, assuming the judges can corroborate this, disqualified from any future events. And they shouldn't be playing. And I might be getting absolutely roasted in the comments for this video. I don't really care, because this type of stuff is unacceptable. And honestly, I was just reading it, and sometimes I just want to make a video about some things that are important. And I view this as a very important topic, especially for the future of competitive integrity. If we start seeing this just because people could see that they can get away with it, not that it's going to happen often, but the times that it does happen, and it will happen, because no matter what kind of things you have in place, protections, people still get angry, still end up in this spot. Well, if we don't have those things in place, we don't have immediate disqualifications, we don't have consequences for these actions, then it will just happen more and more. And I've seen that happen in other trading card games, and I really don't want to see that happen for Star Wars Unlimited. So really, really important that this gets kind of acknowledged by some sort of authority on the situation. Because at the end of the day, I make videos and I play the game. And at the end of the day, many of these people posted and just play the game. We don't really have any real power besides the power of exposing / moving this conversation to someone who does have the authority. And that's where I can come in and add kind of my 2 cents on the whole thing. And I'm sure those of you that were at the Vegas Planetary Qualifier, you can let me know your experiences down in the comment section down below. Because you also, some of you in the comment sections and some of you that watch my videos are affected by this. So it just got me a little bit more passionate about talking about something like this. So I really, really hope that we see some sort of repercussion. Honestly, like I hope FFG announced something that like this is unacceptable and this person will no longer be participating. Like, or maybe the store comes out and says something like, yeah, we are going to disqualify the winner of the Planetary Qualifier and give it to like the second place player. I don't even care if they give it to the second place player, to be honest. At this point, and I'm sure that the second place player would disagree because they want to move on in the ranks. But I just want to see some sort of consequences for this type of action. Because at the end of the day, every single story says the same thing, which is, oh yeah, he just sat down and played some more games, and then eventually went to win, which is impressive, right? Seemingly very solid player, but doesn't matter. Does not matter, in my opinion. Doesn't need to be a permanent ban, just removed from the current cycle of competitive events. And if comes back and does the same thing, then maybe we can talk about permanently banning in the future. But I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Don't really have much else to say, to be honest, and I probably repeated myself a few times, but these types of things it just makes me so it's so out of pocket. It's just so crazy to me that these things truly still happen, and we're gonna see it happen again and again and again. I've been on YouTube for a long time. There are just some irrational people that just say the stupidest things, and that's gonna happen. But there's got to be consequences for that, especially in a competitive event. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.